You Hashem Torah or L'chav Gimel Nisan. Shalom Aleichem Klal Yisrael. B'Shem Hashem Na'aseh v'Natzliach. Be'ez Hashem. Dvarim sheneschadshuu hayoim. Hayoim b'kodesh Shmo. So it's famous. I believe it's from the Vilna Gaon. The difference between Chometz and Matza. If you look at the words Chometz and Matza, the only difference is the Hey and the Ches, because the Mem and the Tzadi are the same. In fact, they're in the same order. The difference is the Ches of Chometz is the beginning before the Mem Tzadi, and the Hey of Matza is at the end. So, a few pshatim in this Ramaz, al pi derech Musar and Kabbalah. So, the Hey is at the end. Right? So that is a siman to humility. So it's not just the difference, as we know from the Gra, that it's this tiny little spot of ink to make the ches sholem. It's this tiny little spot of ink. It's also the fact that the position of the letter is at the end. The Chometz, the ches comes first. He puts himself first. So to always put oneself first, I don't know what it is. I was here first. I want to be first in the queue. Attention seeking, maybe also. That's always from the ego, and that is a symptom of Chometz, a symptom of ego. So that's al pi the derech that, as is known, the Chometz is more ego because it's bigger, it's more blown up. So al pi that derech also, and this is the derech that I said today to Rabbi Fisher Shlita, and he liked it, that we have, as we know, the number 3 is very significant, and obviously the difference between Ches and Hey is 3. So if you're looking at the Gematria now, what is the significance of this number 3 that is the difference between Chometz and Matza? And this number 3, that Chometz is 3 more than Matza. Now obviously more, Ribuy and Kamus. What is the Ribuy and Kamus over here? So it seems to me that it represents Kina, Taiva, and Kavod. The 3, as the Rambam says, the 3 main Avi Avois Atuma in Midas Rois. And Rav Dessler says that there's an Avi Avois of all the Midas Rois. And the same thing is alluded to in the introduction to the Shari Yosher of that Hakdama to the Sefer Shari Yosher of Rav Shimon Shkop Zatzal, that the source of all Midas Rois, and therefore the source of these big 3, which are the source of many other Midas Rois, is selfishness. In Kelm they called it Avas Atzmoi, a wrong kind of being overly concerned with oneself. And how does that work? How is it that Kina, Taiva, jealousy, desire, and prestige or honor are all manifestations of seeking, self-seeking, love of self that's not the correct kind of love of self? What is it? It's always being concerned about oneself in a not good way, in a materialistic, non-spiritual way. Kina, jealousy, I'm worried about myself, someone else has something that I want. Taiva, stam, I want stuff more and more. Covered, prestige, stam, I want honor, I want upliftment. It's all about me. But if you think about it, those 3 senses of self-seeking, those 3 types of self-seeking, they are all illusionary. They're an illusionary, false sense of self-seeking. They're a false sense of more. They're a kamus that doesn't have any echos. They're volume without quality. without substance, just like the chometz, like the bread is blown up out of proportion. And if you push on it, if you take a big piece of puffy bread and you push it on it, you'll see that it's really much, much, much smaller than it appears. So someone who's always chasing kinah, taiva, and kavod is much, much smaller than he really appears in real life. And this is important to see for oneself. And when one does a cheshbon nefesh, when one does a little bit of self-inventory and a little bit of introspection into kinah, taiva, and kavod, one sees that it always comes from this being overly concerned with one's false self. On the other hand, when one expands the spiritual self, as we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this world with a hay, right? If one's in the real world, it says "Akinah b'tayva b'kavod moitzias adam min ha'olam." So the olam that we're talking about is the olam of the hay, as Rav Moshe Cordovero says, that the hay represents the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. Al pi the Gemara in Brachas, in the first parak of Brachas, Ki b'ka Hashem Torah elamim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world to come with a yud, and this world with a hay. And the Gemara, I think in Menachos, says that the next world is created with a yud because there's very few people who go there, because that's the remez of the yud. And this world is created with a hay. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's letter of action and hilada, productivity. And that takes us straight into now the Rav Moshe Cordovero, that the hay represents this world as HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended it to be, and that everybody is initially created within a hay. So if you look at it, this is the hay of Matza. If you look at it, this is the Dalet section of the hay, and this is the little Yud section of the hay over here. So if a person's created in the middle over there, so if he wants to, he can go down. There's an opening at the bottom of the hay. That's the bechira, that a person can choose to stay in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world within the hay, or chas v'shalom, he can choose to go down. That's the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. That's the shleimus that Hashem created. And a person can, if he wants, he can stay in the hay, in the hay of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the matzah. But if chas v'shalom he does a chet, and we call it a chet, so then he chas v'shalom, he's going to close that gap over here, right? And then he's going to be stuck in Olam Hazeh without access to the ruchnias, the shefa that is being allowed in through that hole. He's not being allowing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's shefa in because of chatoim, whereas we know chatoim are mavdil, chatoim are sins, are actually just a barrier between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So then he has to do teshuvah. When he does teshuvah, he removes that wrong kind of shleimus of the ches. He opens it again and he has to go onto the roof. That's why the Baal Tshuva says the Rav Moshe Cordovero is in the makom that tzaddikim gemurim are not aymed. The Gemara says, and Rav Moshe Cordovero explains, because he's a Baal Tshuva, so he has to have additional distance between him and chet. He has to have additional distance between him and sin. So he has to go onto the roof of the gag, on the head of the hay, on the top, and that's where he has to live. So again, that's the difference between the matzah and the chometz. It's the difference of living a spiritual life or being stuck in a material life, which is represented by the ches. So, and that is al pi Rama, is how we can understand this vort of the Vilna Gaon of chometz versus matzah. And the other one that they say about it is that it's a very, very small difference, that's a subtle difference sometimes, and that the only difference between chometz and matzah, if you look at it, because they're both made from bread and water, is time. That sometimes procrastination can be the biggest enemy. Procrastination can be the difference. It causes the difference between something that's a chiyuv kares chas v'shalom to something that's a gross, a tremendous mitzvah. We know that the mila of eating matzah is incredible. And the reason this is still relevant after Pesach until Shvuos is because we know that at the end of the day, the time between Pesach and Shvuos is all about Tikkun HaMidos. It's all about preparation for Har Sinai. And as we know, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that one of the three conditions for Har Sinai, for Kabbalas Torah, is humility. And one of the types of humility that we're talking about here is being mamayit, is lessening, making a little less of ches to turn into hay, which is to lessen oneself, to be maktinis atzmacha, with less kina, less taiva, less covered. In that way, a person gets more hay and less ches, gets more humility, less self-expansionism. In that way, a person can be zoicha to Kabbalas Torah. Ad Khan. Thank you very much. Shtabach Shemulad.